Eth stood at the center of the sparring circle, all four of his arms crossed in a display of absolute confidence. His chitinous armor gleamed under the training facility's lights, and his mandibles clicked together in what his species considered a smile. Around him, students from a dozen different worlds watched and whispered. He was undefeated. 17 matches, 17 victories. No one at the Galactic Academy could touch him. The combat theory classroom had cleared out 10 minutes ago, but at least 40 students had followed them to the training facility. Word spread fast when Eth issued a challenge. Professor, a massive with gray scales and tired eyes, had tried to talk him out of it. Eth had ignored her. He was a warrior, trained since childhood in the ancient arts of his people. What did these soft academy instructors know about real combat? Across the circle, the human girl checked the settings on her training gear. Maya was her name, though Eth had barely bothered to remember it when she introduced herself 3 days ago. She was small, barely reaching his thorax, with dark hair tied back and brown skin that looked so soft it might tear. No natural armor, no claws, no venom sacs, just flesh and bone wrapped in academy training clothes. She had arrived at the academy with a notation in her file that made Eth laugh. Earth, Class 12, the highest danger classification in the galactic database. He had looked it up after class, certain there was a mistake. The entry described a planet with crushing gravity, an atmosphere that corroded metal, extreme temperature swings, and thousands of species that had evolved specifically to kill. The oceans were filled with monsters. The land teemed with predators. Even the plants were poisonous. And yet this girl, this tiny creature with no visible weapons or defenses, had come from there. Impossible. The classification had to be outdated, or perhaps humans had evolved on a safer part of the planet and exaggerated their danger for status. It happened sometimes with primitive species trying to seem impressive. "You can still back out," Maya said quietly. She stood with her hands loose at her sides, her posture relaxed. No shame in it. The watching students murmured. Eth's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of irritation in his species. "The only shame would be in allowing fear to guide my actions, but I understand if you wish to withdraw your earlier statements. I will accept an apology." It had started in class an hour before. Professor had been discussing combat philosophy across different species. Eth had stated the obvious truth that predator species made superior warriors. It was simple biology. His people had evolved hunting the great beasts of there. They had 4 arms for grappling, natural armor for defense, and reflexes honed by millions of years of evolution. Maya had raised her hand. "I don't think that's completely accurate," she had said, her voice polite but firm. "Some of the best warriors come from prey species. They had to develop different strategies, and some species were both predator and prey, which made them even more adaptable." Eth had felt his neck plates flare. Adaptation is the excuse of the weak. True warriors rely on natural superiority. "Dinosaurs were naturally superior," Maya had replied, "for millions of years. Then the environment changed and the weak little mammals survived instead." The class had gone silent. Several students had made quiet sounds of shock. No one contradicted Eth. He was the best fighter in their year, possibly in the entire academy. And this human, this newcomer who had been here less than a week, had just implied he was obsolete. "Perhaps you would like to test your theory in the training ring," Eth had said, his voice cold and formal. Maya had looked uncomfortable. "I don't think that's necessary. I was just offering a different perspective." "I insist, unless your species' evolution has made you too adapted to avoid conflict." She had stared at him for a long moment. Something had flickered in her eyes, something that made Professor shift uneasily, but Maya had simply nodded. "Okay, but don't say I didn't warn you." Now they stood in the ring, and Eth felt a surge of satisfaction. He would win quickly and decisively. The human would learn her place, and things would return to normal. He activated the sparring field, and the holographic boundary sprang to life around them. Safety protocols engaged. The field would prevent lethal damage while still allowing full contact combat. "Ready?" the automated referee asked. "Ready," Eth said immediately. Maya took a breath and rolled her shoulders. "Ready. Begin." Eth launched forward, all four arms striking in his signature opening combination. It was a pattern he had perfected over years. 2 high strikes to occupy the opponent's defense, then 2 low strikes to the body. No one had ever successfully blocked all 4. The pattern was too fast, required too much coordination. Maya moved. She didn't block. She didn't dodge in the way Eth expected. Instead, she shifted her weight and slipped past his guard entirely, her smaller size letting her flow through a gap he hadn't known existed. His strikes hit empty air. Before he could reset, she delivered a palm strike to his thorax. It shouldn't have hurt. He had armor, but somehow the impact transferred through the chitinous plates and he felt his internal organs shift. He staggered back, his legs scrambling for purchase. The crowd gasped. Eth shook his head, recalibrating. She had gotten lucky, found a weak point. He circled her, more cautious now, watching her movement. She didn't bounce or shift like other fighters. She moved with an economy of motion that seemed almost lazy. Her hands stayed low. Her breathing was steady. He feinted with his upper left arm, then struck with his lower right. She leaned back just enough for his fist to miss by a hair's width. He followed with a roundhouse kick. She stepped inside it, too close for the strike to have power, and swept his supporting leg. He crashed onto his back, his armor cracking against the floor. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Instinct took over and he rolled away, scrambling to his feet. His training had covered this. Ground fighting was dangerous. Get vertical, maintain distance, use reach advantage. He pressed his attack, determined not to let her dictate the pace. He struck high, low, middle, switching targets constantly. She blocked some strikes, deflected others, and slipped away from the rest. Her hands moved precisely, never wasting energy. When she did block, she angled her arm so his force slid away rather than meeting it directly. And she never stopped moving. She circled him constantly, making him turn, making him work. His breathing grew heavier. Hers didn't change. Eth felt the first touch of doubt. He had trained for hours every day since childhood. His endurance was excellent by any standard. So why was he tiring faster than her? "Your third arm telegraphs," Maya said suddenly. Her voice was conversational, almost friendly. "You drop it right before you strike. Fix that." Rage flared in Eth's chest. She was coaching him. In the middle of their fight, he roared and charged, abandoning technique for raw aggression. He would overwhelm her, show her what fury truly meant. Maya's expression changed. Her eyes focused with an intensity that made Eth's instincts scream. She had been holding back. Everything up to this moment had been her testing him, measuring him. Now she fought. She came inside his reach before he could adjust, her movements suddenly faster. An elbow to his mandible joint made his jaw go numb. A knee to his lower thorax folded him forward. When he tried to grapple her with all 4 arms, she twisted in a way that shouldn't have been possible and locked his upper arms together, using his own strength against him. The crowd was shouting now, but Eth couldn't make out the words over the pounding of his hearts. He tried to power out of her hold. She rode his movement like water, adjusting her grip and pressure. He felt his armor crack. "Tap," she said in his ear. "Tap out, there's no shame in it." Shame, there was nothing but shame. He was losing to a human, to this tiny creature from a world he had mocked. His pride wouldn't let him quit. He thrashed harder. Maya sighed. Then she did something with her legs and suddenly he was on the ground again, her weight distributed perfectly across his back, her arm around his neck in a hold that cut off blood flow but not air. He could breathe. He just couldn't escape. "Tap out, Eth," Professor's voice cut through the noise. "She has you, it's over." His vision was starting to tunnel. He slapped the mat 3 times with his free hand. Maya released him instantly and rolled away. The crowd erupted. Some were cheering. Others were silent with shock. Eth lay on the mat, gasping, his pride in ruins around him. He heard movement and looked up to see Maya standing over him, her hand extended. She was offering to help him up. It was perhaps the greatest humiliation of all. His opponent, the one who had just systematically dismantled him in front of everyone, was showing him mercy. He wanted to refuse, but his body was exhausted, and some part of him, the part that had been trained in honor before arrogance, made him take her hand. She pulled him to his feet with surprising strength. Up close, he could see that she wasn't even breathing hard. A light sweat sheened her skin, but that was all. She had beaten him and barely exerted herself. How? The word escaped before he could stop it. Maya looked at him with something that might have been pity. My grandmother fought in the water wars. My dad was a deep-sea salvage diver. I grew up training in 1.5G and learned to fight in pressure suits underwater. She paused. You trained in a gym. That's the difference. She released his hand and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for her. Eth stood in the center of the ring, 4 arms hanging uselessly at his sides, and watched her go. Around him, students were pulling up there, searching for information about Earth and humans. Professor approached slowly. I tried to warn you. She's just one human, Eth said, his voice hollow. An exceptional individual. The shook her massive head. She's not exceptional for a human. She's average, maybe even below average by their military standards. She gestured at the students huddled around their devices. They're learning what I already knew, what you would have known if you had bothered to research before challenging her. What do you mean? Earth's gravity is 1.3 times galactic standard. Every movement she makes here is easier than what her body trained for. Earth's atmosphere has less oxygen than most worlds. Her endurance is naturally superior. And humans, paused, choosing her words carefully. Humans evolved as persistence predators. They didn't run faster than their prey. They just never stopped chasing. They followed wounded animals for days until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. That instinct is in all of them. Eth felt something cold settle in his chest. She was never in danger. No, she tried to warn you. She tried to decline. But you pushed, and when you wound a human's pride, when you challenge their honor in front of others, something activates in them. Something old and dangerous. Looked at him with those tired eyes. You made the mistake every species makes when they first encounter humans. You looked at them and saw soft, weak prey. You forgot that prey that survives to evolve intelligence is the most dangerous prey of all. Eth looked down at his 4 arms, his natural armor, all the advantages his species had evolved. Advantages that had meant nothing. I challenged her based on appearance. Yes, and now you know. Children play in conditions that would kill most adults from civilized worlds. They call it camping and do it for fun. Started to walk away, then paused. The biggest mistake wasn't challenging her, Eth. It was assuming that because she looks different, she must be weaker. Remember that. The galaxy is full of things that don't look dangerous until they are. The professor left, and Eth stood alone in the empty ring. Around him, the academy continued its rhythms. But for him, everything had changed. He had learned what it meant to face a girl. And he would never forget it. The next 3 days were the worst of Eth's life. News of his defeat spread through the academy faster than a hull breach. By the next morning, every student knew. The mighty warrior, undefeated champion, had been beaten by the new human girl. The mocking started immediately. Hey, Eth, need a human to open that door for you. Someone called in the dining hall. Better watch out. I heard there's a human girl in your next class. Another student laughed. He tried to ignore them. He attended his classes and kept his head down, but the whispers followed him everywhere. In combat training, his usual sparring partners suddenly had scheduling conflicts. No one wanted to train with the fighter who had lost to someone half his size. The worst part wasn't the mockery, it was the footage. Someone had recorded the entire fight and posted it to the Academy's network. Eth watched it once, alone in his quarters, and felt his shame deepen. He had been so confident, so arrogant, and Maya had dismantled him piece by piece, making it look easy. The video had been analyzed frame by frame. Students posted commentary about every mistake he made, every opening she exploited. His signature four-strike combination was now a joke. The four whiffs of shame, they called it. Someone had even set it to music. By the third day, Eth stopped going to the training halls entirely. He attended only mandatory classes, sitting in the back where no one could see his face. His arms felt heavy. His armor seemed to weigh more than before. He had spent his entire life training to be a warrior, and now he couldn't even step into a gym without feeling eyes on him, hearing the whispers. He considered withdrawing from the academy. Perhaps he could return to join a military unit where no one knew about his humiliation. But even that felt like running away, and running was what prey did. Though maybe, he thought bitterly, he had been prey all along and just never realized it. On the evening of the third day, Eth sat alone in Observation Deck 7. It was a small deck, rarely used, with a wide viewport showing the stars. He liked the silence, the emptiness. Here, no one could mock him. Here, he could pretend the last 3 days hadn't happened. He heard footsteps behind him but didn't turn. Whoever it was would leave once they saw the deck was occupied. Students at the academy learned quickly to respect privacy. The footsteps didn't stop. Someone sat down beside him on the bench. Eth turned his head, ready to ask them to leave, and froze. Maya sat next to him, looking out at the stars. She didn't say anything at first, just watched the void beyond the viewport. She had changed from her training clothes into casual academy wear, and she looked even smaller without the tactical gear. "Nice view," she said finally. Eth's mandibles clicked involuntarily. He had avoided her since the match. The last thing he wanted was to face her again, to see the satisfaction in her eyes. "What do you want?" "Nothing, just sitting." She tilted her head, studying the star patterns. "That's Sol, my home system. You can barely see it from here, but it's there. Third little dot from that bright one." He didn't respond. She was probably here to gloat, to add one more humiliation to his collection. Humans were predators after all. Predators enjoyed the suffering of their prey. "You've been avoiding the training halls," Maya said. "I wonder why." "The mockery will pass. Give it a week, maybe 2. Some other drama will happen and everyone will forget." "I won't forget." The words came out harsher than he intended. Maya nodded slowly. "No, you probably won't. First real loss usually sticks with you." She paused. "You know what your real mistake was." Besides challenging you, he couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "You thought showing mercy was the same as being weak." Eth turned to look at her fully. "What?" "I tried to decline the match. You thought I was afraid. I wasn't. I was trying to spare you this." She gestured vaguely toward him, encompassing his defeated posture. "I knew what would happen. I've fought people like you before. People who trained their whole lives in controlled environments, who never had to adapt to real danger." "You're saying I'm not a real warrior." It wasn't a question. "I'm saying you're a different kind of warrior, a dual specialist, excellent technique, perfect form, trained in traditional styles." She looked back at the stars. "But you've never had to fight for your life. Not really." Something hot flared in Eth's chest. "And you have." "Yeah," her voice was quiet. "I grew up on Titan Station, a terraforming colony on a moon of Saturn. High gravity, thin atmosphere that needed constant maintenance, and equipment that failed every other week. When I was 12, our dome sprung a leak during a storm. Toxic atmosphere started flooding in. My dad and I had to suit up and patch it from the outside while the wind tried to throw us off the hull." She picked at a thread on her sleeve, not meeting his eyes. "When I was 14, our water recycler broke and flooded the lower levels with contaminated water. I had to dive down to shut off the valves manually. No light, no visibility, just me and a flashlight in freezing water filled with chemicals that burned my skin even through the suit." Eth listened, his earlier anger fatting into something else, something that might have been understanding. When I was 16, I lost my best friend. Equipment failure during a mining operation. She was there one moment and then, Maya's voice caught. Then she wasn't, and we all just had to keep working, keep surviving because stopping meant everyone died. She finally looked at him and her eyes held no triumph, only a weary knowledge that aged her beyond her years. Every human you meet has survived Earth or somewhere worse. We're not special because we're the toughest. We're special because we survived and decided to be kind anyway. That's the real strength, Ev. Not winning fights. Choosing not to crush someone when you can. Ev felt something shift in his understanding. You could have beaten me faster. In about 15 seconds if I wanted to, but that would have been cruel. You challenged me in public. Your pride was already going to take a hit. I tried to make it educational instead of just humiliating. She smiled sadly. Didn't work out that way, I guess. Sorry about that. He stared at her. She was apologizing to him. Why are you here? Because I've been where you are. Different circumstances, but same feeling. That moment when you realize you're not as good as you thought, that the universe is bigger and more dangerous than your training prepared you for. She stood up, stretching. It sucks, but it's also the moment when you can actually start learning. Learning what? That there's always someone better, always something new, and that's okay. That's what makes life interesting. She started toward the exit, then paused. You want to know the real secret of training? What? It's not about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being the one who gets back up, every time, no matter what. She turned back to face him fully. You got knocked down, Ev. What you do next is what matters. You can sit here feeling sorry for yourself, or you can get back up and become better. She left before he could respond. Ev sat in the silence, her words echoing in his mind. The stars continued their eternal dance beyond the viewport, uncaring about his small drama. He thought about his training, years of practice, of perfecting forms and techniques. He had been taught that combat arts were superior, that his species' natural advantages made them apex warriors. But no one had taught him what to do when those advantages weren't enough. No one had taught him how to adapt. Maya had adapted. She had taken his measure, adjusted her strategy, and defeated him using techniques he didn't recognize. And then, instead of celebrating her victory, she had tried to help him. Ev stood up. His body still ached from the fight 3 days ago. His pride was still wounded. But Maya was right about one thing. What he did next mattered more than what had already happened. He left the observation deck and headed toward the training halls. It was late evening, so most students would be at dinner or in their quarters. He could practice without an audience, could begin to rebuild what had been shattered. The training hall was empty except for one person. Maya stood in a sparring circle, moving through forms he didn't recognize. They were fluid, almost like a dance, but each movement had purpose. Strike, block, evade, counter. She flowed from one to the next without pause. She noticed him and stopped, couldn't stay away. You said I could become better. I want to learn how. The words felt strange in his mouth. He had never asked to be taught. He had always been the one teaching others. Maya studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, but first rule, forget everything you think you know about fighting. Traditional forms are good for basics, but they make you predictable. Real combat is chaos. You have to learn to adapt. How? By fighting people who don't follow your rules. Different species, different styles, different strategies. She gestured at the sparring circle. Your four-armed style is actually excellent for what it is, perfect technique, but you've only fought people who fight like you. That's why I beat you. I don't fight like anyone else. Eth stepped into the circle. Teach me. No, she shook her head. I won't teach you. We'll learn from each other. You show me your techniques, I show you mine, and we figure out how to make both of us better. That's how humans train. We share knowledge because we're stronger together. It was a strange concept. In culture, Combat knowledge was carefully guarded, passed down through family lines. Sharing techniques with outsiders was practically unheard of. But then, culture hadn't prepared him for Maya. "Deal," he said. They trained for 2 hours that night. Maya showed him how she had slipped past his opening combination, demonstrated the weak points in his guard. In return, he showed her the proper way to strike with multiple limbs simultaneously, techniques that could be adapted to her two-armed fighting. She was a quick learner, incorporating his lessons into her style almost immediately. When they finally stopped, both were breathing hard and covered in sweat. Ed's body ached, but it was a good ache. The ache of productive training rather than shameful defeat. "Same time tomorrow?" Maya asked. "Yes." She grinned. "Good, and Eth, for what it's worth, you're not a bad fighter, you just had bad expectations. That's fixable." Over the following weeks, they trained together every evening. Word spread, as it always did, but this time the mockery faded. Students watched their training sessions with interest rather than derision. Some asked to join. Maya welcomed them all, teaching them the human principle of adaptive combat. Eth learned more in those weeks than he had in years of traditional training. He learned to read unfamiliar opponents, to adjust his strategy mid-fight, to use his natural advantages in new ways. And slowly, his confidence returned. Not the arrogant confidence of before, but something steadier, something earned. One evening, as they cooled down after a particularly intense session, Maya said, "You know, you're getting pretty good at this. Couple more months and you might actually beat me." Eth's mandibles clicked in amusement. "You're just saying that to motivate me." "Maybe, but I mean it too. You're adapting. That's the hardest thing to learn." She punched his shoulder lightly, a gesture he had learned was friendly among humans. "Proud of you." The word surprised him. When had anyone last said they were proud of him? His family took pride in his victories, but pride in his growth. That was new. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me." "Girl, remember, we don't give up on anyone." She stood and stretched. "Come on, I'm starving, let's get food." They walked to the dining hall together, and for the first time since the fight, Eth felt like he belonged at the academy again. Not as the undefeated champion, but as a student still learning. And somehow, that felt better. The alarm woke Eth from a deep sleep. Not his personal alarm, but the academy's emergency klaxon. Red lights flashed in his quarters, and the automated voice repeated the same message over and over. "Hull breach in Sector 7. All students evacuate to safe zones. This is not a drill." He was up and armored in seconds, old training taking over. His door slid open to chaos. Students poured into the corridors, some still in sleep clothes, all heading toward the evacuation points. The academy had drilled for this scenario 100 times. Everyone knew where to go. Eth joined the flow of bodies, his 4 arms helping him push through the crowd. Sector 7 was the old research wing, scheduled for renovation. It should have been empty at this hour, but the academy sat in a debris field, remnants of an ancient battle. Micro-impacts happened occasionally. Usually the hull held. Not this time, apparently. He reached the safe zone and checked in with the emergency coordinator, a nervous Pelion whose feathers were standing straight up with stress. "Have you seen Maya?" Eth asked. The Pelion checked her, tapping frantically. "Human, first year. She checked in with the Sector 7 coordinator 20 minutes ago. She was in the library studying late." Eth's blood went cold. "Sector 7 is where the breach happened." "I know. We're trying to reach that coordinator now, but communications are down in that section." The Pelion's feathers trembled. "Emergency teams are suiting up, but it'll take time." Time that people trapped in a depressurizing sector didn't have. Eth turned and ran back toward the corridors. Behind him, the Pelion shouted something, but he ignored her. The emergency doors were already closing, sealing off the damaged section. He slid through the last one just before it locked. The corridor beyond was darker, emergency lighting only. Warning signs flashed on every wall: pressure loss, toxic atmosphere, authorized personnel only. Eth ignored them all. He had trained with Maya for 2 months. She had become more than just a training partner. She was his friend, and friends didn't abandon each other. He found an emergency locker and pulled out an environment suit. It was designed for anatomy, but he made it work, sealing 2 arms inside the chest cavity and using the others for the sleeves. The helmet was too large, but it would hold pressure. He activated the suit's oxygen supply and continued deeper. The Academy's layout was burned into his memory from countless emergency drills. Sector 7 library was 3 decks down and 2 corridors over. He took the emergency stairs, moving as fast as the clumsy suit would allow. The air was already getting thinner. His helmet display showed pressure dropping steadily. He found the first body near the library entrance, a Pelian student, unconscious but breathing. The student had managed to trigger an emergency oxygen mask before passing out. Eth dragged him to an emergency shelter pod, sealed him inside, and activated the distress beacon. The pod would keep him alive until rescue teams arrived. The library doors were sealed, but the emergency override still functioned. Eth forced them open manually, his 4 arms straining against the mechanism. Inside, the scene was worse than he had imagined. The breach had torn through the outer wall, and one entire section of the library was open to space. Books and data crystals floated in the zero-pressure zone, tumbling slowly. Emergency bulkheads had sealed off the worst of it, but the atmosphere in the remaining areas was nearly gone. He found 6 students huddled in an emergency shelter near the back. They were alive but terrified. One of them pointed frantically toward the sealed section. Eth looked through the transparent emergency bulkhead and saw them. 3 more students trapped in the zero-pressure zone, unconscious, floating near the breach. And Maya, wearing a library employee's emergency suit that was far too large for her, was trying to reach them. She had tied a safety line around her waist and anchored it to a structural support. The suit she wore looked ancient, probably from when the library was built decades ago. It wheezed with each breath she took, the oxygen recycler struggling. She pulled herself hand over hand through the zero gravity, reaching for the closest unconscious student. Eth sealed the door to protect the 6 students in the shelter, then approached the emergency bulkhead. He had no way to communicate with Maya, no radio in his mismatched suit, but she saw him through the transparent barrier and gestured frantically. He understood. She needed help. He found the bulkhead controls. Opening it would equalize the pressure, which meant the remaining atmosphere in his section would rush out. He would be in vacuum just like her. His suit was rated for 30 minutes in hard vacuum, maybe 40 if he was lucky. He opened the bulkhead. The atmosphere screamed out around him, and suddenly he was weightless. His stomach lurched, but he forced down the nausea and pushed off toward Maya. She had reached the first unconscious student, a small who couldn't have weighed more than 30 kilograms. Together, they maneuvered the student back toward the shelter zone. Working in zero gravity was nothing like training in the gym. Every movement had to be calculated, every push and pull considered. Eth's 4 arms were actually a disadvantage here, each one adding momentum that had to be controlled. But Maya moved with practiced ease, like she had trained for this her entire life. Of course she had. She had grown up in a space colony. This was probably routine for her. They got to safety, sealed them in a shelter pod, and went back for the next one. This student was larger, with thick limbs and a heavy exoskeleton. It took both of them to move him. Eth's suit was already showing warning lights, 20 minutes of oxygen remaining. The third student was the hardest. She had drifted far from the others, almost to the breach itself. Beyond the torn hull, space waited, infinite and cold. Maya's safety line wasn't long enough. She looked at Eth, and even through the helmet he understood what she was asking. He untied her line, secured it around himself, and let her tie the other end to him. Now they were both on the same line, doubling their reach. If anything went wrong, they would both be lost, but there was no time to find a better solution. They launched together, aiming for the drifting student. The line played out behind them meter by meter. Ed's suit screamed warnings. 10 minutes of oxygen. 5 minutes. Warning, pressure loss. Warning, temperature critical. They reached the student, a young, and Ed felt his heart stutter. It was one of the students who had mocked him after his defeat, one of the students who had made his life miserable for weeks. Maya grabbed him without hesitation and started pulling him back. Ed helped, using all 4 arms to haul on the line. His suit temperature was dropping. His fingers felt numb. The oxygen warning changed from yellow to red. They made it back to the safe zone with 3 minutes of air remaining. Together, they sealed in the last shelter pod and activated his beacon. Then Maya grabbed Ed's arm and dragged him through the bulkhead into the section where atmosphere remained. She slammed the bulkhead control and it screeched shut. Slowly, agonizingly, the emergency system began to the area. Ed's suit showed 0 oxygen remaining. He was breathing the dregs of his recycler, mostly carbon dioxide. His vision tunneled. He felt Maya's hands on his helmet, heard the hiss of a connection being made. She had plugged an emergency oxygen canister into his suit's intake valve. Fresh air flooded his lungs and his vision cleared. Through his faceplate, he saw her watching him anxiously. He gave her a thumbs up, a human gesture she had taught him. She returned it, then sat down hard against the wall, her own chest heaving. They had done it. All 9 students accounted for, all alive. The emergency teams arrived 15 minutes later, shocked to find the sector already secure. They took statements, checked everyone's condition, and transported the unconscious students to the medical bay. Professor arrived with the rescue coordinator, a massive wearing full emergency gear. The looked at the scene with his multifaceted eyes, taking in the sealed shelter pods, the closed bulkheads, and the 2 exhausted students sitting against the wall. "You 2 did this. Alone." "We were here," Maya said simply. "Someone had to." "You violated about 15 safety protocols," the continued, but his tone was more awed than angry. "You entered a depressurized zone without proper equipment, performed rescue operations without training certification, and opened emergency bulkheads without authorization." "Yes, sir," Eth said. He was too tired to argue. If they expelled him for this, so be it. At least everyone was alive. The mandibles clicked in a way that might have been approval. "You also saved 9 lives. The Academy Council will want to hear about this, but that's for tomorrow. Tonight, medical bay for both of you. Get checked out. That's an order." They spent 3 hours in medical getting scanned and questioned. Minor frostbite for Eth, mostly in his extremities. Mild oxygen deprivation for Maya, plus a dozen small cuts from broken equipment. Nothing serious, nothing permanent. They had gotten lucky. When they were finally released, dawn was breaking over the station. The academy was quiet, most students still sleeping. Eth and Maya walked together toward their dormitories, neither speaking. What could you say after a night like that? "You came after me," Maya said finally. "Of course. You could have died. That suit wasn't rated for vacuum operations. You had maybe a 50-50 chance of making it back." Eth's mandibles clicked. "You taught me that training isn't about being the strongest. It's about being the one who gets back up, who keeps fighting." He looked at her. "You also taught me that humans don't give up on anyone. I learned from the best." Maya smiled, tired but genuine. "You saved. He's one of the students who mocked you." "I know. And you saved him anyway." "Yes." Ed thought about his old self, the arrogant warrior who measured worth by combat victories. That version of him might have hesitated, might have weighed revenge against honor, but Maya had taught him better. Because that's what you do. You save who you can, even the ones who don't deserve it. "Especially the ones who don't deserve it," Maya corrected. That's the hard part. That's the part that makes you better than you were. They reached the split in the corridors where their dorms diverged. Maya started to turn away, then stopped. Hey, Ev, remember when I said you thought mercy was weakness? Yes. You proved me wrong tonight. You showed mercy by saving people who hurt you, and you did it without hesitation. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. She left before he could respond. Eth stood in the empty corridor, her words settling into his bones like armor, stronger than arrogance, stronger than pride, strength built on choosing to help even when you didn't have to. 2 weeks later, the Academy Council held a ceremony. Eth and Maya stood before the entire student body while the Academy director presented them with citations for bravery. Was there, fully recovered, watching from the audience. He approached Eth afterward. I owe you my life, the young said, his voice quiet. After how I treated you, you had every reason to leave me there. No, I didn't, Eth said. That's not who I am anymore. Nodded slowly. I'm sorry for all of it, the mockery, the jokes, everything. I was wrong. Where even then, I was wrong too about a lot of things. Eth extended a hand, another human gesture. Start over. Took it, I'd like that. That night Eth made an entry in his personal log. He had maintained the log since childhood, recording his training progress, his victories, his thoughts on combat philosophy. But tonight's entry was different. I challenged a girl and she defeated me, but that wasn't my biggest mistake. My biggest mistake was thinking the fight was the important part. She didn't just beat me. She taught me that survivors of Earth don't prove their strength by dominating others. They prove it by lifting others up. I challenged a warrior and found a teacher. I challenged a girl and found a friend. And perhaps that's the most terrifying thing about humans. They turn enemies into allies and they make it look easy. The galaxy should be grateful that when humanity reached the stars, they brought their mercy with them. Because a species that survived Earth could have become conquerors. Instead, they became explorers. They became teachers. They became the kind of people who risk their lives to save even those who hate them. And that, I think, is the real reason to say, humanity, fuck yeah. He closed the log and looked out his viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth hung in the darkness, a blue marble of death and beauty. It had shaped the humans, hardened them, made them into survivors. But it hadn't made them cruel. That was the miracle. That was the lesson he had learned at the cost of his pride. Eth smiled, his mandibles clicking softly. Tomorrow he would train with Maya again. They would learn from each other, grow stronger together. And maybe, just maybe, he would finally understand what it truly meant to be a warrior. Not the strongest or the fastest or the most skilled, but the one who chose to help, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The one who got back up. Every single time.